Why data feels familiar to the human brain. The spreadsheet glowed softly in the darkness, rows and columns breathing like lung tissue, organizing chaos into something almost visible. She didn't know why staring at structured information felt like coming home. But somewhere between the headers and the formulas, her mind relaxed in a way conversation never allowed. Data wasn't cold. It was rhythm made legible. He had spent years believing numbers were the opposite of feeling, sterile descendants of pure logic, disconnected from the body's knowing. But the first time he mapped his own sleep patterns against his mood, something unexpected surfaced. The patterns didn't explain him. They recognized him. When was the last time you felt understood by something that wasn't trying to speak? Neuroscientists studying pattern recognition discovered something quietly profound. The same neural networks that light up when we recognize a face activate when we detect structure in information. The brain doesn't distinguish between social recognition and data recognition. Both are forms of seeing order where chaos threatened. We are pattern-seeking creatures living in a pattern-generating universe. She scrolled through months of her own keystrokes, timestamps, search queries, the digital exhale of her attention. At first it felt invasive, like reading someone else's diary. Then she realized this wasn't surveillance. It was memory externalized. The mind forgets. Data remembers on our behalf. But there was something else happening beneath the surface, something researchers at Stanford began mapping in the early 2020s. They observed subjects viewing datasets versus viewing abstract art. The same regions associated with aesthetic pleasure activated in both conditions. Beauty, it seemed, wasn't reserved for sunsets and symphonies. Symmetry is beautiful. Correlation is beautiful. Clarity emerging from noise. That's beautiful too. He closed his eyes and tried to imagine his grandmother understanding this. She had organized recipes on index cards, tracked birthdays in a worn leather book, knew every cousin's middle name without needing to search. Her mind was the database. Her memory was the interface. Perhaps data doesn't feel foreign because it isn't. Perhaps it's just the continuation of what humans have always done, externalize cognition to survive complexity. Part of her wondered if this was rationalization. Maybe she was just trying to justify spending hours in dashboards and visualization tools, finding comfort in graphs while the world outside demanded presence. Maybe organizing information had become another form of hiding. But then she remembered the relief she felt creating her first budget spreadsheet at 19. Not because it made her rich, but because it made the invisible visible. Money had been this abstract anxiety, shapeless and consuming. The spreadsheet didn't solve her financial problems. It gave them coordinates. Fear becomes manageable when it has dimensions. Cognitive scientists call it cognitive offloading, the process of transferring mental effort to external structures. We've been doing it since cave paintings, tally marks on bones, knots in rope, the abacus, the calendar. Each innovation wasn't a replacement for thinking, it was an amplification of it. Data is the latest grammar for thinking outside our skulls. She had a colleague who refused to track anything. It makes life mechanical, he said. I want to live, not measure. She understood the fear. Measurement can become prison. Optimization can devour presence. But she had learned something different. The act of defining what mattered forced her to know what mattered. You can't measure what you haven't named. And naming is the first act of consciousness. When did we start believing that spontaneity and structure were enemies? He thought about his son, 7 years old, obsessed with organizing his toy cars by color, then by size, then by speed. Adults called it just a phase. But he recognized it as something deeper, the human instinct to sort chaos into systems, to find the algorithm underneath randomness. Children don't learn to categorize, they arrive knowing. We're born taxonomists. There's a reason spreadsheets feel meditative to some minds. The same reason puzzles satisfy. The same reason cleaning a closet can feel like therapy. Order isn't the opposite of creativity. It's the substrate creativity needs to breathe. In stillness, structure becomes visible. So a research team in Copenhagen studied artists, engineers and writers, mapping their brain activity during creative work. They expected to find differences. Instead, they found something unifying. Before creation comes pattern detection. The sculptor sees form in the stone. The coder sees logic in the problem. The writer sees rhythm in the silence. All creation begins with recognition. All recognition begins with data. She opened her journal, the analog one, the one without timestamps or metadata. She wrote, "What if data isn't the death of intuition, but its translation? What if the things I track are just the things I'm finally ready to see?" The line between observation and transformation is thinner than we admit. He had tried meditation apps, habit trackers, mood journals, each one promising clarity through quantification. Most felt hollow, like trying to measure water with a sieve. But occasionally, something clicked. A graph would reveal a pattern he'd lived but never noticed. Sunday evenings tanked his energy. Creative work flourished before noon. Socializing required 2 days of recovery. The data didn't create these truths. It gave them a voice. Anthropologists studying indigenous knowledge systems found something startling. Cultures without written language developed elaborate oral data systems, genealogies spanning centuries, ecological observations across generations, astronomical patterns memorized in song. Data isn't a technology. It's a human instinct wearing different clothes across time. Part of him resented how much of his life could be reduced to metrics, steps, calories, screen time, sleep cycles. Where was the unmeasurable self, the part that existed beyond quantification? Then he realized, the act of asking that question was itself a form of data. Doubt is information, resistance is signal. Maybe the unmeasurable parts matter most because they remind us what the measurements are for. She attended a data visualization conference once, expecting sterility and spreadsheets. Instead, she found artists, people who saw stories in scatter plots, designers who treated histograms like landscapes. One presenter showed climate data rendered as music. Temperature rising became pitch ascending, and suddenly global warming had melody. Information wants to be felt, not just known. Philosophers used to debate whether mathematics was discovered or invented. Now neuroscientists suggest a third option. Mathematics is recognized. The brain doesn't create logic. It aligns with logic that's already woven into reality. Data is the echo of that alignment. He stood in a museum once, staring at an ancient tablet. Babylonian accounting records from 3,800 years ago. Grain inventories, tax calculations. The ordinary pulse of a civilization preserved in clay. Someone had cared enough about accuracy to press these symbols carefully, across millennia, that caring remained readable. When was the last time you treated your own data as an artifact worth preserving? She started printing her monthly reports, not to obsess over productivity, but to remember. Each page was a portrait of attention, where it went, what it built, what it avoided. Future her would want to know what present her couldn't see. Memory is the first draft. Data is the revision. What surprised her most wasn't how the habit tracking app improved her consistency, but how it redefined what consistency meant to her. She wasn't expecting a tool to change her rhythm of awareness, and honestly, she tested it more than once before she understood what actually mattered. This isn't a recommendation, just a reflection that stayed with her. The link is below if you feel called to explore what she means. But the real shift came later, in silence. He deleted all his tracking apps for a month. Cold turkey. Wanted to prove he could live without the metrics. And he could. But something felt absent. Not the data itself, but the act of noticing. Tracking had been a form of witnessing. Without it, days blurred together, each one forgettable because none were observed. Measurement isn't about control. It's about presence. Researchers studying memory formation discovered that recall strengthens not through repetition, but through retrieval. The act of remembering changes the memory. Similarly, the act of tracking changes the experience being tracked. To observe is to participate. To record is to transform. She realized why data felt familiar. It was the opposite of entropy. In a universe collapsing toward disorder, data was the human insistence on meaning. Every spreadsheet was a tiny rebellion against forgetting. Every graph was a refusal to let experience dissolve unmarked. We measure because we matter, We track because we care. He thought about his grandfather's workshop, tools outlined on pegboard, every socket wrench in its shadow, not obsessive control, but respect. A place for everything because everything deserved to be found again. Data is the pegboard for the mind. There's a Buddhist meditation practice called counting the breaths. 1 to 10, then start over. Not to achieve anything, but to notice when attention wanders. The counting isn't the point, the awareness is. Maybe all data is counting breaths, a way to notice what we'd otherwise miss. She closed the spreadsheet and looked out the window. The trees were organizing light into leaves, cells into structure, seconds into seasons. Nature was the first database. DNA, the first code. Evolution, the first algorithm iterating toward survival. Humans didn't invent data. We inherited it. The spreadsheet glowed softly in the darkness, rows and columns breathing like lung tissue. But now it wasn't organizing chaos. It was revealing what had always been there, waiting to be read. She had stopped asking if data was human. She started asking if humans had always been data, telling ourselves stories about what the patterns mean. And in that question, something ancient and new aligned. What part of this reflection spoke to you most? And from where are you watching? Let's keep the dialogue open quietly. Tell us which country or city you're watching from. See you in the next video. Bye.